10 years of marriage, George became successful, thanks to me. Yet, he has always hated me to the core. After my death, he took over my family's company and married his first love. On their wedding day, my former childhood betrothed and later rival, Hubery, detonated a bomb at the ceremony. Before the flames consumed everything, Hubery smiled and said, "She's dead, yet you all are living well. How can there be such good fortune in this world?" When I opened my eyes again, I was back 10 years ago. I grabbed George and headed to where we would break off the engagement with Hubery. He looked at me indifferently and said, "Have you thought it through? Are you really going to break off the engagement for him?" "Vicky, I never go back on my word." "Are you sure you want to break up with me for this guy?" As that familiar cold voice echoed, I was still lingering in the aftermath of the explosion. The overwhelming colors of fire felt like they could burn even my soul, floating in midair. Hubery stood in the flames, holding a gun, and pulled the trigger. With a mix of shock and anger, George smiled and said, "She's dead, yet you all are living well. How can there be such good fortune in this world?" In that moment, the invisible shackles on me suddenly vanished. I felt something new fill my mind. It turned out that in my past life, I was the cruel female antagonist in a story about a sickly but beloved character. I had targeted George, who was still a poor student, using his mother's medical expenses as leverage. I coerced him into accepting my financial support and dating me. George believed I was humiliating him with my money, which made him hate me for many years. After we got married, he conspired to take over my family's company while secretly maintaining an affair with his first love. Eventually, he drove me insane, sent me to a mental institution, and watched as I fell to my death. Then he transformed into a new elite and married his first love. I finally understood. Hubery and I had grown up together, inseparable since childhood. So why did I suddenly fall for George, as if I had lost my mind, when he appeared in my past life? Coming back to my senses, I looked around at the different expressions on our parents' faces. And there was Hubery sitting on the sofa, his brows furrowed, looking up at me. Suddenly, it hit me. In my past life, it was today that I completely severed ties with Hubery. Our families were old friends, and today was supposed to be a regular gathering. But I arrived late, dragging George along. I immediately declared to Hubery, "I never liked you, especially since I already have a boyfriend now." "So, you came to break off our engagement for this man?" Hubery pushed up his gold-rimmed glasses. His gaze fell on George beside me, filled with undisguised disdain. George straightened his back and retorted, "What's there to be proud of? You're just a bit better off than I am." "A bit better?" Hubery smirked, a trace of mockery on his lips. "You better understand that if Vicky hadn't brought you here, you wouldn't even qualify to stand in front of me and speak." Those words struck George's fragile pride hard. In my past life, seeing him humiliated to the point of tears broke my heart. I instantly stepped in front of him and shot back at Hubery. I accused him of being delusional and overly clingy. "Don't think I don't know that the guy who wrote me love letters in high school mysteriously got hit by a car and broke his leg. That was you, right? Hubery, a person like you disgusts me just by looking at you. What else do you have that can compare to George, other than your slightly better background?" I hurled many hurtful words at him, but Hubery didn't argue back at all. He sat silently, seemingly turned into a frozen statue. After a long pause, he adjusted his glasses and calmly said, "Fine, I agree to the breakup." George turned coldly to me. "Vicky, did you bring me here just to be humiliated?" I squeezed my palm tightly, pulling my thoughts from the chaotic rebirth. Hearing this, I suddenly laughed. "Humiliated?" Hubery was just stating facts. "A person like you is just a toy to me. Why would he waste his breath on you? You really overestimate yourself, George." As soon as I said that, the entire living room fell into stunned silence. Everyone stared at me in disbelief. 2 steps away on the sofa, Hubery abruptly raised his head. Behind his glasses were a pair of fragile, translucent eyes filled with lingering astonishment. "What did you say?" George's expression turned extremely awkward. I said, "You don't really think you can compare to my fiancé, do you? He ignores me when he's busy with business. I just vent my frustration on you." I released his hand and took a step back, as if avoiding something dirty. I issued an eviction order. Now, you can leave. George looked at me in disbelief. But the butler, now reacting, escorted him out. Before leaving, he made a strong remark. Vicky, I'm not someone you can summon and dismiss at will. Next time, even if you beg me on your knees, I won't reconcile with you. He was so confident. But I was already too preoccupied with George, quickly running to Huberry's side and crouching down. In my past life, I didn't learn until long after the breakup that Huberry had gone to the hospital that night. He had been sitting on the sofa without moving because he was suffering from a stomach ailment while doing business abroad. But he had rushed back because he really wanted to see me. And yet, the moment I saw him, I declared I wanted to break off the engagement. I really should be ashamed. Our eyes met, and a flicker of understanding passed through Huberry's gaze. He smirked. Are you taking out your frustration on your boyfriend again? It wasn't Huberry's fault for thinking this way. In my past life, I did use Huberry to provoke George, trying to prove he cared about me. Now, I could only soften my voice and play dumb. What boyfriend? Huberry, you're my only fiancé. He looked down at me. I'm not feeling well, can you take me to the hospital? Huberry suddenly frowned. What's wrong? Are you having menstrual cramps again? Without thinking, I replied, yes, cramps. He glanced at me. Today doesn't seem to be your period. Because of George, we had actually been in a cold war for a long time. I didn't expect him to remember my cycle. A wave of sour emotions filled my heart. That's because it came early. I cautiously grabbed his sleeve and shook it. I need to get a painkiller. Can you come with me, please? Huberry seemed lost in thought, silent for a moment. He replied calmly. Okay. Once we got into the car, I called the driver over, insisting Huberry wouldn't drive. He didn't insist either, and just sat beside me in the back seat. There was, however, a distance of one person between us. I quietly asked, Huberry, are you mad at me? He slightly curled his lips. Self-deprecatingly, he said, how could I dare? Just those 4 words drowned my heart in overwhelming guilt. In my past life, controlled by the plot, my parents couldn't persuade me, so they just watched me marry George. I poured my family's resources into his company, toiling away. Huberry always competed with George, snatching his projects. I viewed him as my rival. During those 10 years in my past life, the few times we met were always cold and bitter, and I never gave him a pleasant face. Huberry. I sniffed, suddenly speaking, have you missed me after 2 months? Huberry glanced at me. He didn't reply. Feeling a bit awkward, I tried to make conversation. You didn't bring me a gift when you came back this time. I brought you something last time, but you threw it away, saying my stuff was dirty. He finished speaking coldly and turned his head away, closing his eyes. It was a clear sign that he didn't want to communicate with me anymore. Last time Huberry returned, he had given me a whole box of rubies. When he handed them over, he casually said, take them and make some little trinkets, don't hang around with low-quality stuff all day. Both the rubies themselves and Huberry's words hurt George's pride as a man. So, to cheer George up, I smashed the box of gems back at him. I don't want your dirty things. Thinking of this, I desperately closed my eyes. In my heart, I cursed the original plot for being so stupid. No one could write something like this without at least 10 years of brain freeze. In reality, I could only gradually shorten the distance between us, moving closer to Huberry. I turned to him, pressed against his side, resting my chin on his shoulder, and whispered, actually, Huberry, there's something I need to tell you. My warm breath created a small gust of air, brushing against his scattered hair by my ear. Suddenly, Huberry opened his eyes, reaching out to grab the back of my collar and pulling me aside. No matter what act you put on with that George today, I'm not listening, so don't waste your energy. He frowned, and Vicky paused for a moment. And if you're feeling unwell, don't move around. When Huberry scolded me, his expression was cold and stern. But I noticed his earlobe and neck were flushed. He also adjusted into an awkward sitting position. Huberry. I tentatively called him, you won't. Just sit still. He lowered his eyelashes, hiding the turbulent desires in his eyes, his voice slightly hoarse. You don't need to worry about my matters. When the car stopped at the hospital entrance, the icy and tense atmosphere between Hubert and me had eased considerably. I recalled his painful stomach issues and pretended to need his support, linking my arm through his. Suddenly, a sweet but angry voice rang out beside us. "Vicky!" I turned to see Zora, George's first love, storming up to me, glaring furiously. "You did this on purpose, didn't you? You deliberately cut off George's mom's medication to force him to bow to you." Her gaze shifted to behind me, and her eyes suddenly turned red. "You said before that if I disappeared, you would get that senior oncologist to treat George's mom. Are you backing out now?" "Zora." George stepped up quickly from behind me, pulling Zora behind him protectively. He furrowed his brows, speaking softly. "Vicky, it's all my fault. I'm not angry about what you did today, just don't make things difficult for Zora and my mom. From now on, I'll listen to you." Suddenly, I realized. In my previous life, that oncologist who treated George's mom was someone I got through Hubert's family. Wait. I didn't have a chance to speak. Hubert suddenly withdrew his arm from mine, looking down with a mocking smile. His gaze was filled with understanding and a chilling resentment. "I was wondering why you suddenly wanted me to take you to the hospital. Vicky, this is what you wanted to tell me, isn't it?" The look on Hubert's face, sharp yet as fragile as shattered glass, I was all too familiar with. In my previous life, every time I clashed with him over George, he would look at me like that. Back then, I was bound by the original plot, focused solely on George, finding Hubert's pretentiousness utterly annoying. Now, my heart ached, and I instinctively retorted, "No." But he no longer looked at me, coldly addressing George. "If you look down on me, then show some real skill. You can't even take care of your mother's treatment without dragging my fiancé into this act. Isn't that embarrassing?" George clenched his teeth, humiliation flashing in his eyes. "Don't think you're so great." He tightened his fists and said coldly, "One day, you'll pay for what you said today." Hubert ignored him and walked away without looking back. I was about to chase after him when George grabbed me. "Vicky." He looked at me with lowered eyes, his voice hoarse. "Vicky, it's all my fault. Don't be angry." When his cold fingers gripped my wrist, memories of my past life flooded back, and I felt a cold, venomous snake coiling around me. "Don't touch me. Disgusting." Caught off guard, I pushed him away, leaving George stunned. He clearly couldn't believe it. After all, in the past, no matter how angry I was, as long as he softened a bit, I would back down without limits. "Vicky." He wanted to say something more, but I cut him off. "Since you always think I'm humiliating you by spending money, transfer the $600,000 I previously gave for your mom's treatment into my account within 3 days. Let's see just how much backbone you have." I hurriedly ran in my high heels and finally caught up to Hubert at the hospital entrance. "Hubert!" I was panting as I grabbed his sleeve. Before I could say anything, he turned his head. "Vicky, we do have some past between us. But that doesn't mean you can rely on it to make me back down for your little boyfriend," he said coldly, trying to pull his sleeve away, but I held on tightly. "It has nothing to do with him. Okay, I admit, I didn't come to the hospital because of my period. I wanted to bring you here because your stomach is acting up, isn't it? Hubert, don't think I don't know you skip meals when you're out on business." He looked at me in shock, his gaze scanning my face inch by inch, as if trying to determine the truth of my words from my expression. Seeing him soften a bit, I seized the moment. I dragged him into the examination room. The doctor, holding his test report, frowned. "Chronic gastritis requires careful attention to diet, especially when uncomfortable. You shouldn't push through, come to the hospital for treatment as soon as possible. We'll start with 2 days of 4 fluids." Sunlight streamed through the glass window, shining brightly into the room. When it was just me and Hubert in the ward, the air suddenly became quiet. I ordered some porridge, and when it arrived, I blew on a spoonful and fed it to him. Hubert lowered his eyelashes, seemingly lost in thought. "The doctor said you need to eat something, otherwise, you'll feel uncomfortable during the 4." I reminded him, and finally, he looked up at me. His eyes sparkled in the sunlight, reflecting shimmering waves. Okay. He replied softly and finally opened his mouth. After half a bowl of porridge, Hubert gestured for me to put the bowl down. Phone. I handed him my phone, puzzled, watching him enter a string of numbers. What's this? The oncologist's number, the one you've been wanting to invite. I gasped, seeing the pale expression on Hubert's face and the faint bitter smile at the corner of his lips. I suddenly understood. Even now, he thought I had ulterior motives. You took me to the hospital, I'm giving you what you want, so I don't owe you anything. I don't want you to bring this up again when you come begging for help regarding him, saying you feel sick just watching me eat porridge. Vicky. I'm human too. The sunlight slanted in, casting a rare softness across his stern features. My heart suddenly felt heavy, and I couldn't speak. I remembered what Hubert said. 3 months ago, when George's studio wanted to secure a project, Hubert was the decision-maker on the client's side. So, I went to him, persuading him with a home-cooked meal and a gift. While he was happy, I asked, could you ease up a bit and let George's team take on the project? The smile on Hubert's lips faded in an instant. He put down his chopsticks and looked at me. So, you came to find me today for your boyfriend? George is really capable. I tried to argue, but his cold voice interrupted. A capable person wouldn't need to rely on you to secure a project. Just go home, I've already reviewed the proposal and made my decision. I won't choose him. Hubert stood up, pulling back his chair, signaling me to leave. I lost my mind in anger and pointed at him, yelling. If it weren't for George, I wouldn't want to see you at all. Just seeing you eat my cooking makes me feel nauseated. In my blurred vision, a hand suddenly reached out, wiping away the moisture from my eyes. Only then did I realize I was crying. Hubert withdrew his hand and said lightly, don't feel wronged, after today, I won't seek you out again. Vicky, we're even. Given my history, it was normal for him not to trust me. As I tried to convince myself, I forced back my tears and looked earnestly at Hubert. I'm sorry. He paused slightly, you can't force feelings, no need to apologize. Once I get back from the hospital today, I'll tell your parents clearly that we're breaking off the engagement. He hadn't finished speaking when my sudden kiss cut him off. Hubert's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked at me. I fumbled a bit as I lingered on his lips, then pulled back slightly, clutching his collar and gasping for breath. No, don't say we're breaking up. I steadied myself and continued, Hubert, whether you believe it or not, those things related to George weren't what I wanted. I brought you to the hospital just because I saw you looked unwell. I was worried about your health. He lowered his eyes, emotion swirling beneath his long lashes, unclear. Is this your new tactic? I pushed down my own feelings. I've lived long enough, and we've known each other for years, so you can't not trust me. If you don't believe me, then I'll kiss you again. As I said this, I leaned in once more. But Hubert pressed his forehead against mine, stopping me in time. His breath was so close, his voice husky. Vicky, do you know what you're doing right now? I replied, yes, I'm doing what we did when we were 18. Those words ignited everything, instantly burning away all rationality between Hubert and me. That night after the college entrance exams, my family held a feast to celebrate. I had a few glasses of champagne and tipsily pulled Hubert into my room. I asked him, what does a kiss feel like? He looked at me quietly, Vicky, you're drunk. I frowned, don't change the topic. If you don't tell me, I'll ask someone else. Before I could finish, Hubert suddenly grabbed my chin and kissed me. A faint lemongrass scent wafted from him, reminiscent of the gift I gave him for his birthday this year. Our lips and the fingers pressed against my neck were burning hot. My head spun as I instinctively clutched his collar, forced to endure the overwhelming heat that followed. Hubert's voice was laced with suppressed desire, that's what a kiss feels like. Do you want it to go deeper, Vicky? At that time, we were so good and so close. I always thought that after graduating from college, I would marry Hubert. But once school started, it was the first sight of George that dragged me back into the original storyline. How could he run away while lying in the hospital bed? A nurse came to reinsert Hubert's IV and reminded him, don't move around, there's just one more bottle to go. Hubert nodded blandly. I, sitting beside him, rubbed my warm ears. Once the nurse left, I whispered an apology, "I'm sorry. I got so into the kiss earlier that I accidentally shifted his fore, and blood soaked the tape." He glanced at me, "No need to apologize." "Then will you believe me? Let's see how you perform." Though he said that, his tone had softened towards me. By the end of the month, Hubry went to a neighboring city for business. I returned to school, but made sure to message him whenever I could, proving to him that he was the only one in my heart. Hubry's birthday was approaching, and that afternoon, I planned to pick out a gift for him at the mall. Suddenly, I spotted a familiar figure from a distance. It was George. He hadn't contacted me for days since we had a heavy conversation at the hospital. I was relieved about that. But now, during what should have been a busy time at his studio, he walked into a nearby garden restaurant with a young man. My heart tightened, and I rushed forward a few steps. Just as I entered, the man looked up. It felt like thunder striking. I froze in place. This man was none other than Nick, who had worked with George in my past life, leading to the downfall of both Hubrys and my family. I stealthily followed, hiding behind some greenery, to overhear their conversation. "Hubry has already gone to City S. It seems he hasn't realized there's a problem with that project." "Project?" George sneered, his voice cold. "What I want isn't just his company, I want his life." In my past life, I often wondered why. Hubry came from the Hubry family, the most outstanding child of this generation. He was studying for an MBA at a top business school by age 20, and then returned home to take over the family business. How could someone like Hubry continuously lose to George and end up with half his company swallowed? Was it just because he had the protagonist's halo? Or did he hold some special information? What was this S-City project they mentioned? Countless questions swirled in my mind. I wanted to ask Hubry, but feared that confronting George could hasten the original storyline, forcing Hubry toward his destined outcome. After much thought, I decided to approach George to gather intel, preventing Hubry from falling into danger influenced by the original plot. After returning home, I had the housekeeper make soup and took it to the hospital. Sure enough, I ran into George in the ward. He shot me a cold glance, but said nothing. I approached him, feigning submissiveness, and tugged at his sleeve. Trying to recall my previous haughty yet vulnerable tone, I said, "You're not still angry with me, right?" "I'm also quite aggrieved. You promised me you wouldn't have any contact with Zora. Yet, when I came to the hospital, she was still here, shouting at me, 'Who does she think she is?'" A flash of disgust crossed George's eyes, but was quickly concealed. "I've already sent her away," he replied coolly. "She came that day because she was worried about my mom's health. It won't happen again." "It better not. Don't forget, I'm your girlfriend." I continued. "I asked Hubry, and he said he would help get that specialist to operate on her. But it will take some time. There's a problem with a project he's been wanting to invest in." George's Adam's apple moved as he suddenly turned to look at me. "What kind of problem?" I feigned deep thought. "It seems to be related to something in the outskirts of S-City." The rest of the day, George's attitude towards me suddenly warmed. He subtly probed me about whether Hubry knew anything. Meanwhile, I pretended to be trying to rekindle things with him, and he finally invited me to dinner with Nick and others. Before heading out, I felt inexplicably guilty, so I called Hubry to inform him. But his phone was off. After thinking it over, I realized I couldn't miss such a great opportunity. In the highly private room, Nick raised his glass to me. "Vicky, I'm intentionally investing in George's studio. My name is Nick. Perhaps we'll have a chance to collaborate in the future." I remembered in my past life, he was the one who helped George destroy half of Hubry's company and swallow my business. I could only suppress my nausea and be polite. After a few rounds of drinks, he casually said, "I heard my family has a long-standing relationship with the Hubry family." Vicky and the current head of the Hubry family, Hubry, were once engaged? What engagement? It's all just something the elders said. He often makes things difficult for George. I absolutely hate him. I looked at George. Since I was a child, I've only liked one person, George. If it weren't for George, I wouldn't be putting on this facade and dealing with him. While saying this, I could only think of George and Nick's faces. My apparent hatred was so genuine that everyone in the room laughed. Vicky really has a discerning eye, she can see through Huberry's hypocritical facade. Nick leaned closer with a smile. So, would you mind telling me what Huberry is doing in S City? He. The alcohol hit me, and I stood up. Sorry, I need to use the restroom. As I walked to the door in my high heels, I felt a bit dizzy. I opened the door, and a gust of cold wind mixed with a faint lemongrass scent brushed past me. The light fell on the familiar handsome face before me, jolting me awake. Huberry stood at the door, expressionless, but upon seeing me, he slightly curled his lips. Vicky, so this is how it is. The corridor lights were warm yellow. But on Huberry's face, it felt icy to the bone. He heard. In the mixed sense, I suddenly pulled on a thread of chaotic thoughts, causing the drunkenness to vanish in an instant. My fingers trembled on the doorknob as I sensed something was wrong and instinctively called out, Huberry. Maybe don't call me that, it might just disgust yourself. He looked at me with disappointment and coldness, then glanced over my shoulder at George and Nick behind me. If you want to know what I'm doing in S City, why not just come ask me directly? He chuckled lightly, his voice sharpening with decisiveness. Do you think you can plant a few spies in the company and affect my judgment? Your methods are just as laughable as you are. He was already tall, and now standing straight, his gaze looked down at the group of people, clearly conveying a sense of superiority. Clown. With that remark, he turned and left. Inside the private room, George's expression was grim as he suddenly raised his hand and overturned a plate. What's there to be smug about? Did you think I only had this little bit of skill? One day, I will watch him die right in front of me. I wanted to slap him twice in my heart, recalling the original plot, but I still didn't dare to let my guard down. I could only force a smile. I'll go back with Huberry first and ask him what he found out. After saying this, I grabbed my bag and left. I chased him all the way downstairs and saw Huberry just getting into his car. Huberry! I gasped for breath and hurriedly called out. I came today to find out what kind of scheme George has against you. Through the half-open car window, I met Huberry's calm gaze, which suddenly made my voice falter. He raised a hand, casually resting his chin on it, as if he was listening to an interesting joke. He even curled the corners of his lips into a faint smile and said, do you want to say that this is all because you like me, and you're worried about my safety, afraid I can't handle them alone? A sense of endless anxiety and panic surged up like bubbles on the sea. I pinched my palm, forcing myself to calm down and explain seriously. Yes, I know you don't believe me, but George is not as simple as you think. If his methods were only what he shows. Vicky. Huberry suddenly interrupted me. Through the gradually closing car window, I saw his eyes, seemingly shattered yet still beautiful. You can't take advantage of my love for you, thinking I'll tolerate your endless deceit. Let's not contact each other anymore. With that, the window closed completely, the reflective film blocking everything, and he drove away without hesitation. I was left standing alone. A chilly night breeze swept over, sending a shiver down my spine. In my previous life, after marrying George, Huberry had warned me more than once about George's ambitions, telling me to be careful. But no matter how he said it, I didn't believe him. I even mocked him with a cold laugh. Aren't you just jealous of George? Jealous that he comes from a humble background yet stands in a higher position than you? A hypocrite who speaks nothing but lies. I won't believe a word you say. At that time, Huberry stood in front of me, wearing a well-tailored suit, but his eyes were filled with hurt. Coming back to my senses, I was already in the car, instructing the driver to go to the Huberry family. However, Huberry didn't return to the old mansion or his own house. The car circled around most of the city and finally stopped outside his company building. I looked up and saw a light still on in the office on the top floor. Thinking about the sharp resistance on his face just before the window closed, I suddenly felt a little timid. So I went to a nearby convenience store and bought a can of beer, downing it in one go to bolster my courage. Once the buzz started to return, I walked into the elevator and pressed the button. Huberry's office was on the 39th floor, highly private. But he never put up defenses against me. When I pushed open the door, the large office was empty. From the adjacent lounge, I could faintly hear the sound of running water. Other than that, there was only the faint fragrance of lemongrass mixed with a slight metallic smell. Metallic smell? My heart tightened, and countless scenes from my previous life flashed through my mind as I pushed open the lounge door without thinking. Just as I opened the door, the sound of water suddenly stopped in the lounge restroom. Hubery walked out, drying his wet hair, but as soon as our eyes met, he abruptly halted. "Vicky?" My gaze uncontrollably fell on him. I always knew Hubery was good-looking. But most of the time, he wore that indifferent expression, creating a distance. However, at this moment, due to the mist, the originally sharp contours of his face softened. Water droplets rolled down his hair, tracing the smooth lines of his muscles, disappearing at the edge of the towel around his waist. His usually covered fair skin was now fully exposed, with a small mole on his waist gleaming enticingly. In addition, there were several layers of bandages wrapped around his left forearm, already wet, faintly showing a red hue from blood. He was indeed injured. "Get out." Perhaps my intense gaze was too obvious. Hubery closed his eyes briefly and reprimanded in a cold tone. But his tone lacked any intimidation. I didn't know if it was the alcohol or instinct that made me blink. Not only did I not leave, but I took a few steps closer and shut the door behind me. "You're hurt," I said, walking right up to him. "Hubery, what happened?" "And your wound has started to bleed again, it needs to be rewrapped." "It's just a small injury." Hubery replied nonchalantly, "I can handle it myself, it's none of your concern." He paused for a moment. "Vicky, you shouldn't be in my office right now, considering your boyfriend." I wrapped my arms around his neck, pressing a kiss tinged with the scent of alcohol against him, silencing his remaining words. "Don't say anything, not a single word is something I want to hear." I mumbled somewhat incoherently. As we tangled together, our lips grew increasingly heated. In our chaotic movements, we both fell onto the large bed beside us, the towel coming undone in the process. As this long and deep kiss ended, I leaned on Hubery's shoulders, panting heavily. I saw the stormy desire in his eyes, but still struggled to ask. Was it again for him? Of course it was for myself. The alcohol and the kiss left my mind in a haze, and some words slipped out without thinking. "Isn't it perfectly normal to have some indescribable thoughts about your fiancé after seeing him get out of the shower?" My fingers, damp with water, casually grazed over the snowy white skin, teasing the two pink spots misted with moisture. I watched Hubery's Adam's apple bob vigorously before he grabbed my hand. "Moreover, I've been thinking about this since I was 18. Thinking about you, Hubery, only you." The air fell silent for a moment. Then everything turned upside down. The entire world felt disordered, as if only we remained. The remaining droplets of water quickly evaporated in the high temperature. The lamp on the ceiling swayed like a small boat tossed in a storm, just like me. Soon, all that remained was the breathless remnants. I inexplicably thought back to 18. I recalled the night after the college entrance exam when I got drunk and secretly kissed Hubery on the balcony. No matter how I pouted or teased, he would only kiss me. "Vicky, you're still young," he whispered in my ear, his body temperature scorching, still enduring. "I have to give you a chance to change your mind. Now." "Hubery." I barely managed to utter 2 words before I was startled by the hoarseness of my voice. Hubery paused, his gaze lowered, looking down at me, the thick, misty emotions in his eyes surging and then fading. After a moment, he raised his hand and covered my eyes. "There's no second chance for regret, Vicky." Outside the glass window, rain poured down at some point. Inside the lounge, the humid heat rose with the light. Hubery pressed against the most sensitive spot on my lower back, with varying pressure, his voice low and husky. "Vicky, don't hide. Just feel me." I thought of his arm's injury and felt a bit worried, wanting to sit up and check. But the suddenly increased pressure made me swallow back all my words. "I told you, it's just a small injury." Hubery's long fingers curled around a damp strand of my hair. His usually cold eyes seemed to crack open a gap, revealing the madness buried deep inside. "Time is still long, Vicky, don't be so nervous." In the fresh scent of lemongrass, my own smell gradually mixed in, along with the scent of alcohol. At a certain moment, they merged and spread out. At 4 in the morning, I dragged my weary body across the carpet, barely managing to stand. Hubert used his uninjured arm to wrap around my waist and pulled me back. "You need to rest, Vicky." I tried to turn back and look at him, "But your wound really needs to be rewrapped. How did you get hurt?" Hubert suddenly fell silent. In the suffocating silence, I suddenly realized. "You don't think I'm trying to gather information about you for George, do you?" He stared at me intently, clearly tacitly agreeing. I felt a bit sad and a bit angry. "I told you, I'm worried you might be in danger, so I went to ask George about their plans against you." "Why won't you believe me?" "I believed you." Hubert's voice was soft. "In the past 2 years, I believed you many times, Vicky." My throat suddenly felt like it was blocked by something. I blinked my slightly teary eyes and heard him continue. "But believing or not, it doesn't matter anymore. From now on, no matter how sweetly you talk, I won't let you go. As for George, he's not as simple as you think." I blurted out, seeing Hubert frown. I couldn't help but take a deep breath. "If I told you that in my past life, I died at his hands, would you believe me?" Outside, the heavy rain pounded against the glass, with no trace of moonlight. In the dim, ambiguous light of the room, Hubert across from me seemed frozen. "Past life? Hubert, have you ever thought that we might actually be characters in a book?" After hesitating for a moment, realizing the terrifying power of the original plot, I decided to tell Hubert everything. I don't know if it was a dream or if it really happened in a past life. Anyway, in my last life, from the moment George appeared, it felt like he was the only one I could see. By the time I finished narrating those 10 years of my past life, the rain outside had already stopped. A faint golden light was spreading across the horizon. The last project cost my parents their lives and allowed George to completely swallow my family's assets. He said he hated me because he endured unimaginable humiliation while being by my side for those 10 years. After that, he sent me to a mental hospital, claiming I was too traumatized and mentally unstable. At this point, I suddenly felt choked up. Even though so much time had passed, everything had started over. Those 6 months in the mental hospital still felt like a nightmare to me. Every day, I was bound and forced to receive overdoses of medication. My mind was foggy, with hardly any moments of clarity. I also had to regularly endure the near-death pain of electric shocks. So later, when I finally regained consciousness, I escaped from the ward and jumped off the hospital roof. My voice trembled, swallowed by Hubert's sudden embrace and warmth. His hand threaded through my hair, pressing my head against his chest. "That was just a dream. I won't let that happen." "Yes, you won't." I closed my eyes in his arms. It felt like the flames from that wedding day flooded back to my mind. "So even if in the dream you couldn't resist the power of the original plot and couldn't save me, at the happiest moment for George, you still sent him to hell." The familiar scent from Hubert and the weariness from a sleepless night quickly lulled me into a deep sleep. In my dreams, it felt like I returned to my past life. The 10 years of conflict with Hubert, meeting in public where I used the most vicious words to attack him and oppressed him without reservation. But he still wore that lemongrass-scented perfume. When I was alive, I hated him deeply and never cared. It was only when I saw him consumed by flames that I suddenly understood. Because that was 18-year-old Vicky. The Vicky before she met George. The last gift for Hubert. The first thing I did upon waking was take Hubert to the hospital to redress his wounds. "You can't get it wet, don't use this arm forcefully for 7 days." The doctor instructed seriously. "You can go now." As I sat in the car, I turned to Hubert and asked, "Can you tell me how you got hurt now?" In the dimly lit car, he gazed into my eyes and sighed lightly. "Actually, there was a little accident when I went to inspect the project site." I suddenly bit my lip. Was it related to George? Hubert's warm fingertips parted my teeth and lips, gently caressing my mouth. "Don't worry. The only way he can hurt me is through you. So, you just need to stay away from him, I'll handle the rest." "But I don't want that." I caught his slightly teasing fingers and said earnestly. "Hubert, I've died once, in a way, I'm now older than you. Whatever you plan to do to deal with George, let me know. Can we do this together? He was silent for a moment before replying quietly, okay. Vicky, I won't interfere with your decisions. But you need to stay as far away from George as possible. I nodded, suddenly wanting to tease him. Are you afraid I might be enchanted by George again? Hubery calmly nodded. But behind his lowered eyelashes, a hint of vulnerability flashed by. He was scared. It turns out that Hubery, who gradually took over the company at 16 and was rumored to be decisive, could also feel fear. I held Hubery's face and said seriously. Hubery, we've known each other since the day I was born. I was sickly as a child, staying in the hospital, and you came every day with a bouquet of flowers and comics. When I first got my period at 14, you bought me sanitary pads. After we secretly kissed at 18, I started dreaming about you. Without the original plot's forced brainwashing, I wouldn't even glance at George. I've always loved you, only you. This sentence seemed to unlock Pandora's box suddenly. Through the window, in the soundproof closed space, Hubery suddenly reached out to the back of my head and kissed me forcefully. This kiss was intense, sending tingles through my lips and making my tongue numb from the suction. I felt weak and hot, sliding down onto his lap. Until I crumpled his crisp shirt, suddenly remembering the doctor's warning. Wait, your wound can't be strained. Hubery used his uninjured hand to pull me back, properly seating me on his lap. Because Vicky was pressing down, the thigh muscles wrapped in tailored pants tightened, feeling scorching. I swayed, instinctively bracing myself against his leg. Hubery let out a low, muffled sound, his voice raspy. It felt like there was a growing fire right in front of my fingertips. It burned away my rationality in an instant. My hands moved forward inch by inch, and at the moment they touched that fire, I heard Hubery's voice, filled with suppressed desire. Then I leave it to you, Vicky. Show me what dreams you've had about me. After that day, George didn't contact me for a long time. I checked around the hospital and found out he had managed to get another tumor specialist through someone he knew, and his mother's surgery was completed. This must be his male lead halo. As graduation approached, I decided to intern at my family's company early. Since my family had long collaborated with Hubery's family, it was only natural that I had more interactions with him. I'm planning to visit George's studio later. I sat across from Hubery, took a bite of my bagel, and said. According to the timeline from my past life, at this point, you and I would have had a falling out, and I would start using my family's resources to help George build connections, stealing an important project from you. Hubery suddenly looked up at me. Beneath his long eyelashes, his emotions were laid bare. I quickly added. I'm just going to test how far his current plans have progressed. Wait for me to come back for dinner. George's studio was not far from the city center. Based on his initial connections, if it weren't for my relentless help, he wouldn't even be able to afford to rent this place. When I walked in, I happened to see Zora sitting at his desk. George stood behind her, leaning down in an extremely ambiguous position, almost enveloping her in his embrace. It was like this in my past life. I had noticed countless times the inappropriate tension between him and Zora, but George always refused to admit it. I fought with him over this many times, causing chaos each time. When I was almost hysterical, George just stood by, watching me with weary eyes. Later, all of this became evidence of me oppressing and humiliating him. Coming back to reality from my memories, I coldly said. What are you two doing? The two in front of me seemed to freeze suddenly. After a moment, George straightened up and adjusted his slightly wrinkled clothes. He looked at me, but spoke to Zora. You can leave now. Zora shot me an annoyed glare, before getting up and leaving. The room was left with just the two of us, and George put on his usual cold expression again. Aren't you supposed to be with Hubery? Why come to me? He still tried to manipulate me with his old tricks. If it were the original plot-controlled Vicky, she would have humbled herself and apologized, claiming her love for him. She would have bent over backwards to help his studio, proving that only she could provide certain things. I, Vicky, raised my chin. Recently, there's a project at my family's company that was supposed to be a collaboration with Hubery's company, but I want to choose you instead. George suddenly looked up at me, his throat moving slightly. I smirked, But that project has a long timeline and involves huge funds, so I need to confirm how much you can handle first. Later that evening, I pieced together what I learned from my past life and told Hubery. I suspect that because I've been reborn, the plot has progressed early. George has already hooked up with the newly appointed gang leader, Owen. In my past life, he didn't meet that person until several years later. And with his current influence, collaborating with someone like that was like courting death. Thinking about this, I frowned. Hubery, who had paused while reviewing a contract, looked up at me. That's because Nick can no longer help him. I was taken aback. The project in City S was sabotaged by an insider at the subsidiary, who stole funds and fabricated records. Now Nick and his crew are all in jail. He flipped the page of the documents in his hand, his tone as calm as ever. George's company is still in its infancy, he's too weak and can only rely on others. Suddenly, I realized, you orchestrated this. Hubery didn't deny it, he clearly accepted it. I blinked and threw myself into his arms. Hubery, you're amazing. He grabbed my wandering hand, suddenly serious. Vicky, you shouldn't get involved in what's coming next. Why? Because it's dangerous. He said this, and Vicky frowned. George's background is more complicated than you think, otherwise, Owen wouldn't have agreed to work with him so readily. I froze. You said the past me chose the most brutal way to take them down. Hubery's tone remained steady, yet it carried an inexplicable chill. That must be because I had no other choice. That night, I dreamed again. I dreamt of my 6th year of marriage to George, at some dinner party. I saw him standing closely with Owen's daughter, Ruth, looking intimate. Suddenly, I was irrationally jealous. I lost my mind and sent someone to kidnap Ruth, only to be taken away by Owen's men instead. A cold dagger pressed against my neck and trailed down my body. I thought I would die there. In the end, an indifferent George walked in and took me away from the gang. Because of this, in my past life, I always felt he was only superficially cold, still caring for me deep down. But in this dream, it was like a sudden switch in a movie. I saw another room where scar-faced Owen sat with an expressionless Hubery. In front of them was a large screen, frozen on the moment of the dagger against my neck. Owen chuckled softly. So, Hubery, have you considered working with me? Hubery looked at my tear-streaked face, his expression unchanged. A few seconds later, he averted his gaze. I agree. Let Vicky leave safely. Owen smiled contentedly. Hubery is a smart man. What a pity, if you agreed to be my son-in-law, we'd be family. Hubery coldly replied, I wouldn't want that. After he left, George and Ruth entered. Ruth sighed regretfully. Dad, did Hubery agree to work with us? Owen nodded. His judgment is terrible, he'd rather like that stupid Vicky than marry me. She laughed, glancing at George. When are you finally divorcing that idiot and marrying Zora? I jolted awake. The darkness surrounded me, with only a sliver of moonlight seeping in. The scenes from the dream lingered in my mind, connecting with what I already knew, leading me to uncover hidden truths from my past life. Vicky. I barely moved when Hubery pulled me into his arms. He held me for a few seconds, then spoke with concern. You're shaking. I understand now. I closed my eyes, inhaling his familiar, crisp scent. I know, Hubery, George is Owen's illegitimate son. Owen agreed to work with him now, because they've acknowledged each other as father and son. Hubery seemed unfazed by George's true identity. He just held me tighter. What did you dream about? I wrapped my arms around his slim waist, my voice choked. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Hubery. I finally realized that in my past life, under George and the Zhao family's scheme, I became the hostage, threatening Hubery. Hubery's family business had been forced into dark dealings. So in the end, Hubery chose to take everyone down together at that grand wedding. Fortunately, in this life, I had awakened from the constraints of the original plot. There was still time. Once I calmed down and recounted the dream scenes. Hubery's hand behind me suddenly tightened, his voice chillingly cold. Ruth? I understand now. Under my deliberate guidance, my family quickly reached a Phase 1 collaboration with George's studio. Owen also got involved. At this point, it was still early. He hadn't yet gained total control over City S as in my past life. So during the project, there were many unaddressed flaws left behind. Hubris gathered all of these to use as evidence to bring him to trial in the future. But for the past few days, Hubris hadn't contacted me. That afternoon, I went to his company, where I spotted a strange bright pink sports car downstairs. The door opened, and a familiar figure stepped out. I froze completely. It was Ruth, looking several years younger. I saw her briskly walk to the other side and open the car door. Then, in a suit, Hubris stepped out, a faint smile on his lips. I didn't know what he said, but Ruth covered her mouth and laughed, pulling out something resembling a letter from her bag and handing it to him. Then she got into the car and drove away. Hubris stood still, scanning the area, pausing when he passed my car. I was sure he recognized me. But he acted as if he saw nothing, calmly turning his gaze and heading upstairs. A wave of boundless sadness washed over me. Was this how Hubris felt all those times he saw me with George? I opened the car door and went upstairs, finding Hubris in his office. He looked up from behind his desk. "Why didn't you knock?" I replied sourly, "Does Ruth need to knock to see you?" Hubris paused, then suddenly stood up and walked to the nearby lounge. As he walked, he undid his tie and loosened 2 buttons of his shirt collar. Standing in the lounge with his collar half open, he looked at me. "Come here." I deliberately hesitated, slowly walking over. Just as I entered the lounge, the door suddenly closed behind me. My back pressed against the cold, hard door, while my front was heated by Hubris' warmth. He held my shoulders, kissing me wetly from my lips to my ear, trailing down my body inch by inch. Hubris knew me too well. He understood my reactions, my limits, and what every shiver of my body meant. It felt like I was thrown high into the clouds, then dropped suddenly into an endless ocean. "Hubris." I barely managed to call out, then was tossed back into a sea of boundless pleasure. In the end, before the waves completely engulfed me, I heard his raspy voice, warm against my ear. "Are you done checking? I'm still completely yours." I turned Ruth's letter over in my hands multiple times. I discovered it was an invitation to her birthday party. As the main person in charge of the collaboration project with their family, I also received one. "Things will be dangerous that day, I'd prefer you not to go." Hubris' crystalline eyes looked at me. "But will you listen to me, Vicky?" I honestly shook my head. "No." Then quickly added, "Because normally, we're in collaboration, and it's going smoothly. If I suddenly don't attend the party, it might raise their suspicions." This reasoning was sound, even Hubris couldn't refute it. He stared at me for a moment before leaning in to kiss me again. "No matter what happens, Vicky, remember that your safety is the most important thing." Soon, it was Ruth's birthday party. My family's project was actually a collaboration with the authorities, so many powerful people were in attendance. George, being one of the partners in this collaboration, successfully made a lot of connections. I held a glass of wine, watching Zora follow him closely with a cold gaze. As if sensing my stare, she suddenly turned around, giving me a smug and provocative look. Then, as if to show off, she linked her arm with George's. "Such trash, you can keep it to yourself." As I scanned the room, I spotted several familiar faces among the guests. These were partners George was supposed to meet years later in my past life. Did Hubris' proactive involvement cause everything to happen early? Just as I pondered this, the guest of honor, Ruth, made her entrance. She had one arm linked with Owen's and stood beside the smiling Hubris. "Welcome to my birthday party," she said with a beaming smile, her gaze sweeping over my face with a hint of satisfaction. A waiter wheeled out a massive 3-tiered cake. After cutting the cake, she came down to mingle with the guests and soon stood before me. "Vicky, I hope we can work well together on the upcoming project." Ruth smiled at me, then suddenly turned to Hubris, asking, "I heard you used to have a good relationship with Vicky and were planning a business marriage?" "Just a joke from our parents, nothing serious." Hubris glanced at me with a detached look, then looked away indifferently. "Besides, Vicky is already taken. We're not involved at all now." Even though I knew he was acting, I still bit my lip in frustration. After a moment, I scoffed, I should thank Hubert for finally letting me go. He left with Ruth at his side. I raised my glass and quickly found George by the floor-to-ceiling windows near the garden. He was on a call, and Zora had vanished. Whatever the person on the other end said, his expression gradually grew serious. Outside, the first firework burst against the pitch-black sky. Then came a flurry of explosions. These fireworks, meant to celebrate Ruth's birthday, perfectly masked the distant sounds of gunfire from a gang's secret weapons cache being discovered. Remembering Hubert's earlier warning, I discreetly stepped back into a corner. Just as I was about to leave the garden path, a bloodied figure suddenly stumbled in through the entrance. Our deal has been discovered. With a loud bang, a massive crystal chandelier crashed to the ground, creating a deafening noise. The entire hall was plunged into darkness, chaos erupted instantly. Fearing for my safety, I stayed hidden in the corner, watching as police officers mingled with the guests, taking down Owen's men one by one. "Vicky." Finally, Hubert's voice reached my ears. He made his way to me, concealed by the darkness, whispering, "Their power has been deeply rooted for so many years. There might be backup, we need to leave." I nodded, my previously tense heart gradually relaxing. Just as we managed to avoid the chaotic crowd and reach the garden, a night breeze carrying an unknown floral scent brushed by, and I suddenly caught a whiff of something unusual. Like a premonition from my past life. I narrowed my eyes and suddenly pushed Hubert to the ground, rolling us aside. In the next moment, a flurry of bullets erupted where we should have been, kicking up dust. Dazed, I stood up only to find a dark muzzle aimed at me. "It really is you." George held the gun, looking at me with near loathing. "If you like me, why do you keep ruining my career and opportunities? If you admire me, you should willingly give without expecting anything in return. But you say you like me, yet you only look down on me with pity, from a high pedestal. Vicky, you really disgust me." Even after living another life, George's shameless words left me speechless. In my past life, no matter how well I treated him, how much I helped him, it was still seen as humiliation. Because deep down, he believed that my help should never require any return. "Do I look like a sucker to you?" His absurd logic infuriated me, and I couldn't help but retort. "We don't even know each other. I paid to help you, you should thank me. If you feel insulted, throw the money back in my face and tell me you can succeed on your own without my dirty money." But you didn't. The truth is, even if you're with Owen, you still need to rely on working with me and my family to get the projects you want. Without my help, you're a total failure. The more I spoke, the paler George became. Yet he gritted his teeth and replied, "Someone like you, a pampered young lady from birth, simply doesn't understand. This has nothing to do with my background." Hubert suddenly chuckled, interrupting George. "Blaming others and wallowing in self-pity won't change anything, even if you were born into our family. Like now, you've recognized your father, yet you're still a waste who can only trade looks for opportunities." His eyes were full of disdain, completely unguarded. But it seemed he was already prepared. In the instant George lost control and pulled the trigger, Hubert shoved me aside. Not just one gunshot. Bullets tore through flesh, exploding into a bloody blossom. Warm droplets of blood splattered onto my face. All I saw was a sea of red and his slowly closing eyes. "Hubert." In the hospital room, the smell of antiseptic overwhelmed the citrus scent from Hubert. I sat beside his bed, gritting my teeth. "Are you insane?" His eyelashes fluttered, and he looked at me with a tender gaze. "I'm sorry, Vicky, I just wanted to experiment. To see if, after all our efforts to escape that uncontrollable force, your past fate would repeat." This was why he had intentionally provoked George into shooting him. In reality, the police agents had noticed the commotion in the hall and followed suit. At the moment George fired, they also pulled their triggers, shooting through his wrist and temple. If the effects of the original plot couldn't be avoided, Hubert would surely die by George's hand. Not like now, where the gun successfully veered off, leaving him only with a shoulder injury. But there are many ways to verify without risking your life. This is the safest way. His lips were pale from blood loss, but his gaze never left me. If I really die, George will undoubtedly be sentenced to death. You won't have any further contact with him, nor will you be sent to a mental hospital. For the next few decades, you'll have a stable life of your own, Vicky. He paused for a moment, lowering his voice further. Like a feather drifting into my ear, yet it carried the weight of a thunderbolt. I told you I won't let that kind of thing happen in your dreams. I stared at Hubery, my throat feeling blocked by an invisible force, unable to say a word. He truly seemed a bit insane, willing to wager his life in a high-stakes gamble. If he won, it would prove we had both escaped the shadows of our past. If he lost, his death could buy me peace for the rest of my life. I thought of the injection from my past life, of the fall from a high building. I thought of Hubery's tear-streaked face in the dim booth. I thought of the flames that suddenly erupted at George's grand wedding. I thought of Hubery's consistent citrus scent over the years. Amid the overwhelming tears, I suddenly gripped his collar tightly, leaned in, and bit down hard on his lips. The metallic taste of blood flooded my mouth. That's not allowed either. I said each word clearly, your life is mine. Okay, it's yours. Hubery's previously cold and indifferent eyes were now filled with a kind of moist tenderness. Everything of mine is yours. In those days, Hubery found a way to connect with Ruth, to gather intelligence from her. Together with the police, they took down a weapons deal involving over $1 billion. Due to charges like engaging in organized crime, intentional homicide, and illegal possession of firearms, George, Owen, Ruth, and others were sentenced to death. The connections of all the guests at the birthday banquet with Owen were also gradually being investigated. Although Zora didn't directly engage with the case, she provided some auxiliary help and was sentenced to 2 years. Meanwhile, my family's upcoming projects, phases 2 and 3, smoothly continued to collaborate with Hubery's company. Under the guise of work, I suddenly found myself spending a lot more time with Hubery. No matter how he tried to charm me, I maintained a serious expression and refused. Your injury isn't healed yet, let's talk when it's fully recovered. After saying that, I couldn't help but scold him, drinking with a gunshot wound? Are you trying to get yourself killed? His white shirt, damp from the hot water, clung to his body as Hubery opened his eyes, still hazy from intoxication. A wry smile crept onto his lips. Sorry, Vicky. Another attempt to seduce me. I swallowed hard, pretending to be indifferent as I tossed him the shower head. You can undress and shower by yourself. I'm leaving now. In the steamy bathroom, I had barely taken a few steps when I suddenly heard something heavy drop behind me. Hesitating for a moment, my worry for Hubery won out. I turned around and quickly walked back. Just as I leaned down, he grabbed my neck, and we both tumbled into the large round bathtub. With a loud splash, water flew everywhere. I couldn't help but scream, that custom gown just arrived last week. I'll buy you 10 more tomorrow, he replied, his warm breath brushing my ear, growing hotter by the moment. Vicky, help me. The kiss pressed against my lips, lingering and teasing until it left a slight sting before reluctantly pulling away, but it still carried warmth, trailing down into the water. How can I help you? My voice, suddenly high-pitched with trembling, was completely swallowed by his fervent kiss. It's too hot, cool me down. Liar. How could I cool him down? I could only be led by him, falling into the humid tropical rainforest, followed by a sudden downpour. With a cool touch, it flowed deeper into the river. After a night of tossing and turning, I finally fell into a deep sleep. In a hazy dream, I couldn't tell if it was a past life or this one. It was a time before George had appeared. I was wearing a high school uniform and found a love letter written by a boy in my backpack. Then, like a movie scene, the picture changed. The boy stood among a few thugs, biting a cigarette, full of malice. So what if she's the daughter of a wealthy family? Once I trick her into a date and slip something into her drink, we can do whatever we want. The next day, he was hit by a speeding car on his way to school and broke his leg. In the stark white hospital room, Hubery pushed the door open, looking expressionless at him. This is a warning. If you have any more inappropriate thoughts, who knows what will happen next time. Then the hospital door closed. He picked up the phone. On the other end was the spoiled voice of 17-year-old Vicky. Hubery, my birthday is coming up soon. What gift did you prepare for me? If it's something I don't like, don't expect me to go on the spring outing with you next month. Hubery chuckled, his tone indulgent, It's already on your desk, you'll see it when you get back from school. Outside the hospital corridor window, the sun shone brightly, and cherry blossoms were in full bloom. A gentle breeze carried pale pink petals lazily through the air. It was the springtime of everything yet to begin. End of the story.